Tamil. Vanakkam. And let me greet our Latin American guests. Buenos dias, amigos embajadores de América Latina, bienvenido. Bom dia, embaixador do Brasil, bem-vindo. Mr. Ashok was mentioning, calling me as Excellency. Correction, Ex-Excellency.
The honor of the remains.
They say there are old diplomats and there are also bold diplomats. But a diplomat cannot be old and bold at the same time. I got kicked out when I reached the age of 60 on 31st of May. So I have now become an old and bold ex-diplomat. There is another saying. The diplomats never say no. And the women never say yes. Now, as an old and bold ex-diplomat, I am going to talk freely and frankly. When I used to give speeches in Latin America about India, my Latin American friends would make always a comment. They will say, look at China. They did $235 billion of trade with Latin America last year, and India did $25 billion. China has given credit of $75 billion to Latin America. India has given $200 million. I tell my amigos Latinoamericanos, paciencia, patience. China had a 10-year head start over India. Our trade of $25 billion last year was the same trade of China in 2001. So I tell my friends, give us 10 years, we'll reach there. And I tell them the story of this Argentine girl who gets into a bus. There are no seats, all are occupied. So she looks around and goes to the nearest seat where there is a young man and says very loudly, young man, won't you give seat to a pregnant woman? The guy gets startled, gets up and says, señorita, por favor. She sits. Then afterwards, he picks up courage and confidence and looks at her up and down and says, you said pregnant. How long? She gives him a smile and says, for the last 1 hour. So I tell my friends from Latin America, ours is in the beginning stage. And when I talk about Latin America in India among the business community, the Indians, the argumentative Indians, they have two comments. Number one, they say Latin America is too far. They speak different languages. Distance and language were perceived as barriers. But I tell them the new story, the new paradigm. Today, there are 24 Indian IT and BPO companies in Latin America operating from Mexico to Chile, employing 20,000 Latin Americans. They have converted these so-called barriers of distance and language into advantages. They do a new business model of 12 hours of work from the time zone of Latin America and 12 hours in India to service the markets in United States. So they have converted this as an advantage and language. Now, thanks to their programmers and developers in Spanish and Portuguese, today these companies, they have access to a very large market of 650 million, including the whole of Latin America, Spain, Portugal, Mozambique, Angola, and the 50 million Hispanics in United States. The second comment Indians make about Latin America is that, Latin America has a history of political instability and economic crisis. I tell them, throw away the history books. Past is no guide to the future. I tell them this Mexican balada, no me preguntas más, déjanos imaginar que no existe el pasado, que nacimos al mismo instante en que nos conocimos. Don't ask me more. Let us imagine that the past did not exist, that we were born when we got to know each other. So it's a clean slate. So this is what I call as the new Latin America, with a new paradigm of political stability and economic growth. I will elaborate these political and economic aspects. In the old Latin America, the problem for politics and society was the polarization and vertical split between the left and the right, radicals and conservatives, communists and capitalists. Now, this split and polarization was exploited by external forces who call it as their backyard. But now, in the last 2 decades, democracy has been established and strengthened across Latin America. And the political leaders and policy makers are moving towards the center, pragmatic policies with an equilibrium between pro-poor and pro-business policies. This is the dominant trend. This is the new way in which politics and the society is moving in Latin America. And they give more emphasis to inclusive growth, with the result that poverty rate, which was 44% in 2003, has come down to 28% in 2011. As more people come out of poverty, join this large and increasingly powerful middle class, this becomes the insurance for political stability and democracy. In the olden days, the Chilean ex-president Michelle Bachelet once said, you know why there has been no military coup in USA? Because there is no American embassy in Washington, D.C. There was a Mexican who crossed into the border into Texas and he was caught by the Homeland Security officer. He said, Senor, you have crossed the border. So the Mexican looked at him and said, Mister, I didn't cross the border crossed me. It was part of Mexico earlier. So now this new Latin America is independent, autonomous, they are the master of their own destinies. You know, in the 1980s, there was something called Washington Consensus, which is a set of policies imposed by IMF and Washington on much of Latin America to open their markets, to reduce tariffs, to privatize, and to remove capital controls with the disastrous consequences. But now, the Washington Consensus has been replaced by what I call as the Brasilia Consensus. And what is this consensus? This is a pragmatic balance between pro-poor and pro-business policies. This is the direction in which Latin America is going to move, and that is why I bet on the political stability, democratic stability of Latin America in the long term. Now, economically, I'll just give you one example of the new economic paradigm of Latin America. In the olden days, some of the Latin American presidents, when they got into problems of debt and default, they would run to Washington DC to IMF, please help us. And they would tremble in the presence of the IMF executive director. But in December 2011, Christine Lagarde, the president of the executive director of IMF, she went to Brasilia and she was trembling before meeting President Dilma. She was trembling because she was requesting Brazil to contribute funds to IMF so that they can rescue Europe. This is the role reversal. And guess what did Dilma say to Lagarde? She said, okay, we'll give you funds, but two conditions. You don't know the famous IMF conditions. So she put two conditions. He said, number one, IMF should reform itself. Number two, tell the Europeans that they should behave, they should be responsible, they should be fiscally prudent. These were the lectures and taunts given to Latin America by United States and Europe in the past. Now, I'll just give you two examples of how now the shoe has come to the other side. Let's take deficit. You'll be surprised. Latin America as a whole in 2001 had no fiscal deficit. They had a primary surplus of 0.3%. In 2010, they had 0.3%. And if you see the statistics from 2003 onward, it has been under 2%. And what is the deficit of Europe? Over 4%. UK and Spain over 8%. And United States 8%. Who is fiscally prudent? Now let's take debt. Debt as a percentage of GDP of Latin America is 28%. In the case of Europe, it is 87%. In the case of United States, it is 100%. Now, this is the new Latin America. There used to be, in the olden days, the curse of inflation. People used to say that one can never say exactly the exact population of India or the exact inflation of Latin America. Because by the time you finish the sentence, they were gone. Not any longer. The inflation of Latin America last year was 6.9%. And in the last decade, the inflation has been in single digit. Anyway, much less than in India. And Latin America, with these strong macroeconomic fundamentals, has become resilient, resistant to external pressures and shocks. That is why, you see, despite the global crisis, in 2010, Latin America grew by 6%. In 2011, 4.3%. And this year, it is going to grow by 3.7%. So this new Latin America, I believe strongly, is on a solid foundation of political stability and sustainable economic growth in the long term. And this new Latin America has strategic complementarities and synergies with India. But I'll just give you only two examples to highlight. Two things which Latin America contributes to India, and two things which India contributes to Latin America. The two things which Latin America contributes to India are energy security and food security. Here is the ambassador of Venezuela, who has been supplying over 200,000 barrels of oil per day. Today, India imports 10% of the crude oil from Latin America. Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador. And we are going to need more. And Latin America is going to produce more. Right now, Latin America has 15% of the global reserves of oil, and it is increasing. Brazil, which produces about 2 million barrels per day now, is going to produce 5 million barrels per day by 2020. Colombia, which used to produce about 500,000 barrels per day, now produces 1 million barrels per day. And Mexico, thanks to Peña Nieto and the new reforms which he is proposing, is going to revive the petroleum industry, and they are going to produce more, and they are going to discover more by investment. So we can count on Latin America as an alternative and regular source of crude oil in the long term. Not only oil, gas. Venezuela and Bolivia has tremendous oil reserves, and they have not been fully exploited. And now they have discovered in Argentina the third largest reserves of shale gas. You know about shale gas. It has revolutionized the energy scenario in United States, where the gas price has come down from $16 to just $2, thanks to shale gas. After United States and China, Argentina has the third largest reserves, and it has not been touched yet, and Indian companies have shown interest. The other is food security. Last year, we imported $2 billion worth of soya oil, primary, and a bit of sunflower oil. Now, India imported something like 2000, we imported about 2 million tons of edible oils. Now, last year it was about 8 million tons. And they say by about 2020 we are going to import 15 million tons. But where is the land in India? Where is the water in India? The land is diminishing because of increasing use for residential, commercial, and industrial and mining purposes. And water level is going down. And here you have in South America, you have very large availability of surplus land. Like in the Mercosur area, they can easily bring in another 100 million hectares without touching Amazon. And they have plenty of water, and they have technology, innovation, and best practices. So we can count on South America for this, our food security, and Latin America for our energy security. And what do we give in return to Latin America? I'll give you just two examples. One, Indian IT and BPO companies employ 20,000 Latin Americans across Latin America, including about 1,000 in Uruguay. Now, this is not just simple employment or payment of salary. This I call as capacity building, contribution to human resource development. Because all these 20,000 people who are working with the Indian IT company, they are young people. Their eyes are open, and they develop multicultural skills besides technical skills. And this is our contribution to human resource development. Like for example, if you take Uruguay, no one knew about Uruguay till TCS went and established a center, 1,000 people, and then Uruguay was put in the IT map of the world. That was the revolution. Now, apart from these IT companies, we have other companies which employ another 20,000. So we have about 40,000 people. I must tell my friends from Latin America, when the Indian companies invest in Latin America, they don't take millions of Indians there. They don't form colonies. They don't have mafia there. I'll give you an example. Rengaraj Sugar has invested $420 million in Brazil with 4 sugar mills, ethanol plant, and power plants. How many Indians? They employ 7,000 Brazilians. And how many Indians are there? 2 guys, low-level managers. Aegis is a BPO company of SR Group. They have 5,000 Argentines working for them in Argentina. Now they opened in Peru and they have in Costa Rica. Now, how many Indians are there in the Aegis in Argentina? None. Everything is managed by the Argentines. So the Indian companies have confidence in the human resources of Latin America and provide them ample opportunities to grow. I'll give you a simple example. The guy who started the TCS operation in Uruguay, called Gabriel Rosman, when he did well, he became the manager for South America, and then regional manager for Latin America, and then regional manager for Ibero-America, and then for emerging markets. Today, he is sitting in the board in Mumbai. He is the executive vice president in Mumbai. And he has brought more Uruguay into India. Today, you see in Siruseri, the large complex built by TCS, the architect for this is a Uruguayan, Carlos Ott. The second contribution India makes to Latin America is what I call as the alimentary complementarity. South America provides food to India, and India provides food for the spirit and soul of Latin Americans. Yoga, meditation, art of living, Sai Baba. Some of you might have seen my article about Sanskrit songs in Argentine nightclubs. I couldn't believe it. In an Argentine nightclub, they were singing Sanskrit songs. No alcohol, no smoking, no drugs, no nothing. It's a clean, alternative way of fun. So this is the new movement. So I would like to explore, I would like to request the businessman here that you should explore these new complementarities and synergies, which you have to discover more. And to discover more, you have to visit Latin America. And when you visit Latin America, you come back not only with orders and business, you come back what I call as the business plus. You come back happier and younger. I'd like to thank CII for taking the initiative to organize this and bring the Ministry of External Affairs, Tamil Nadu government, and the ambassadors and the businessmen. They say in Spanish, juntos podemos. Together we can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Your years of knowledge, I think, came in so handy to set up the theme for today's meetings. Thank you so much. I appreciate your telling us about your experiences and knowledge, sharing your knowledge. I'm delighted to invite a very old and dear friend of mine, Mr. Vel Murugan, Executive Vice Chairman, Guidance Bureau of Government of Tamil Nadu, which is why I didn't want to talk too much about Tamil Nadu. What he does not know is not worth recording.